Hey guys, tonight we begin with a civilization that didn't just build an empire, it quietly redesigned the way human beings survive. Because when most people imagine ancient Rome, they think of marching legions, roaring crowds inside amphitheaters, marble statues staring dramatically into eternity, and emperors making decisions with the confidence of people who have never once doubted themselves. But here's the strange truth. Rome's greatest victories weren't won with swords. They were won with ideas. Because conquest fades, borders shift, armies disappear into history books. But systems stay alive long after the soldiers are gone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating seeing people from different parts of the world joining these late-night journeys together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft ancient night atmosphere, and let's slowly walk into Rome. Imagine waking up inside a Roman city nearly 2,000 years ago. The first thing you notice isn't the noise, it's the movement. Rome never really sits still. Merchants are already dragging carts across stone streets before sunrise. Bakers are opening shops while the smell of fresh bread mixes with smoke from cooking fires. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith is already hammering metal into shape with rhythmic precision. Water splashes through public fountains. Voices echo through narrow streets. Sandals scrape against stone pathways worn smooth by generations of footsteps. It feels alive. Organized chaos. And hidden beneath all of it, beneath the shouting and the markets and the movement of people, is something almost invisible. Systems. Because Rome understood something humanity repeatedly forgets. Survival isn't simply about strength. Strength helps during a crisis. But systems prevent crises from destroying everything. Let's start with roads because Roman roads sound boring right until you realize they changed history. Roads existed before Rome, of course. Humans had always created paths between places. But Roman roads were different. Roman roads were obsessive. They weren't simply dirt trails stretching through forests. They were carefully engineered layers of stone, gravel, drainage systems, and precise measurements designed to survive weather, pressure, and time itself. Imagine standing beside a newly built Roman road. It cuts across the landscape with absolute confidence. Straight lines stretching over hills and valleys, as if geography itself had received instructions to cooperate. Romans hated unnecessary curves. If there was a mountain, they climbed it. If there was a forest, they cut through it. Because direct routes save time, and time saves lives. At first glance, roads seem military. Faster troop movement, quicker communication, easier conquest. And yes, all of that mattered. But roads quietly transform survival in ways most people never think about. Imagine harvest failure in one region. Crops die, food becomes scarce, panic begins. Without roads, that disaster stays trapped. Nearby towns starve. People fight over resources. But with roads, grain can arrive from another province hundreds of miles away. Suddenly, a local problem stays local. Suddenly, shortages don't become mass death events. Roads carried food. They carried medicine. They carried information. They carried people fleeing danger. And information itself becomes survival. Imagine news of disease spreading through villages. Without communication systems, communities stay blind. With roads, warnings move quickly. Responses happen faster. Rome connected its empire physically before humanity understood just how powerful connection really was. But roads alone weren't enough. Roads need destinations. Cities need water. Lots of water. And this is where Rome begins quietly showing off. Because water controls everything. Humans settle near rivers for a reason. Without water, civilizations become temporary ideas. But rivers create problems. They flood unpredictably. They dry seasonally. They limit expansion. So Rome looked at nature and did something very Roman. It negotiated through aqueducts. Now aqueducts look almost suspiciously simple. Long rows of arches carrying channels of water across valleys and landscapes. But simplicity hides genius, because gravity did almost all the work. Roman engineers calculated slopes so carefully that water could travel incredible distances while barely dropping in elevation at all. Sometimes only a few inches across miles. Think about that. No electric pumps, no modern machinery, just mathematics and patience. Entire cities suddenly gained reliable access to fresh water. Public fountains operated continuously. Bathhouses functioned daily. Sewage systems improved sanitation. Farmers irrigated fields more effectively. Disease decreased because cleaner water changes survival rates dramatically. Imagine living before reliable water systems. Every drink carries risk. Every drought becomes a threat. Every contaminated source becomes a gamble. Now imagine fresh water flowing steadily every single day. That changes everything. Suddenly, cities grow larger because infrastructure supports them. Populations increase because survival improves. Life expectancy rises because fewer people die from preventable conditions. Rome didn't just move water. Rome moved security. And security changes human behavior. People invest in communities when tomorrow feels possible. People build families when stability exists. People create culture when survival stops demanding every ounce of energy. And here's the strange part. Most Romans probably never stopped to admire it. Humans rarely do. We become used to systems quickly. Water flows every day, so eventually it feels normal. Roads remain standing year after year, so eventually people stop noticing them entirely. But remove them for 1 week, and suddenly everything breaks. That's the thing about civilization. The greatest achievements often become invisible because they work so well, nobody thinks about them anymore. And as the sun slowly climbs over Rome's rooftops, and merchants continue filling streets with movement and noise, you begin realizing something unexpected. The empire wasn't being held together by armies alone. It was being held together by engineers quietly solving problems most people never even noticed existed. And that realization changes the way you see Rome completely. Hey guys, tonight we continue our journey through the civilization that quietly changed the way human beings stayed alive, because Rome wasn't just building monuments that looked impressive in paintings. It was building systems, and systems outlive heroes. By now you may have noticed something strange about Roman success. The empire did not survive for centuries because every emperor was a genius. That would have been impossible. Rome had brilliant rulers, terrible rulers, rulers who improved the empire, and rulers who probably should have been assigned significantly less responsibility. Yet the machine kept moving. Why? Because beneath the statues and triumphal parades, there was an invisible framework holding everything together. Let's begin with roads, because Roman roads sound boring until you realize they quietly changed human survival itself. Before organized road systems, movement was slow, inconsistent, and often miserable. Rain turned paths into mud. Carts broke. Travel became uncertain. Trade moved cautiously. News traveled even slower. Imagine trying to deliver medicine, grain, or military support across hundreds of miles using nothing but rough trails and optimism. Rome looked at this problem and responded with extraordinary stubbornness. They built roads everywhere. Not simple dirt tracks either. Layered roads, stone foundations beneath gravel, carefully designed drainage systems, raised surfaces to prevent flooding. Some roads stretched across mountains, forests, rivers, and harsh landscapes that seemed determined to reject civilization entirely. Roman engineers approached terrain the way Roman generals approached enemies. They expected resistance and ignored it. The result was astonishing. Messages that once took weeks moved far faster. Trade expanded. Food shortages became less devastating because supplies could travel from one region to another. Military response improved. Doctors could move. Merchants could move. Ideas could move. And ideas moving may be one of humanity's greatest survival advantages. Think about it. Imagine one town discovers a better farming technique. Without roads, that knowledge remains trapped. With roads, it spreads. One city develops improved medical treatments. Roads spread it. One region creates stronger tools or better irrigation systems. Roads spread those too. Suddenly, survival stops being isolated. Knowledge becomes shared. Rome understood something incredibly important long before modern civilization did. Connection reduces vulnerability. Isolated communities collapse more easily. Connected communities recover. Roman roads eventually stretched for hundreds of thousands of kilometers across the empire. Some still influence modern roads today, which means people driving cars right now may unknowingly be following decisions made by engineers 2,000 years ago. That's almost absurd when you think about it. A Roman worker placing stones into wet earth could never imagine satellites or highways or engines, yet some of his work still guides movement today. And movement means opportunity. It means food arriving before starvation begins. It means armies arriving before invasion succeeds. It means assistance arriving before disaster becomes irreversible. Roads don't feel exciting because they become invisible. Once infrastructure works, people stop noticing it. Nobody wakes up saying, "Wow, I really appreciate roads today." But remove them and civilization becomes nervous immediately. Suddenly, supply chains fail. Communities isolate. Resources stop moving. The Romans may not have realized they were building the skeleton of future civilizations, but that's exactly what happened. Because empires aren't sustained by marble statues. They are sustained by the quiet pathways connecting one human being to another. And perhaps that's the most Roman thing imaginable. While emperors chased glory, engineers quietly built survival into the ground itself. Hey guys, tonight we continue deeper into Rome, because roads may connect an empire, but roads alone do not keep millions of people alive. Eventually, every civilization faces the same uncomfortable question. How do you feed everyone? Because conquest is exciting. Speeches are memorable. Victories look wonderful carved into marble. But hungry populations become dangerous very quickly. Rome understood this with almost uncomfortable clarity. Imagine standing inside the city of Rome itself during its height. More than 1 million people moving through crowded streets, climbing staircases inside apartment blocks, shouting through markets, buying bread, selling oil, arguing about politics, making deals, building lives. A city that large creates a terrifying problem. Every morning, nearly everyone wakes up needing food again. Yesterday's meal solves absolutely nothing. Tomorrow arrives with the exact same demand. Hunger resets daily. And feeding a city that size without trucks, refrigeration, engines, or modern supply chains sounds almost impossible. Yet somehow Rome managed it. Ships arrived carrying grain from distant provinces, especially from Egypt and North Africa. Massive cargo vessels crossed dangerous waters loaded with enough food to sustain enormous populations. But bringing food to Rome was only part of the challenge. Distribution mattered even more, because food sitting in warehouses saves nobody. So Rome built systems around movement, storage, and organization. Warehouses lined ports. Officials tracked supplies. Grain distributions helped stabilize society. It wasn't perfect, certainly not. But Rome understood something critical. Population survival depends less on abundance and more on reliability. People tolerate many hardships. Uncertainty is harder. If citizens believe food will disappear tomorrow, panic begins today. Panic spreads faster than hunger. Markets collapse. Violence appears. Stability weakens. So Rome attempted something ambitious. It turned food into infrastructure. Imagine workers unloading sacks of grain beneath blazing Mediterranean sunlight, while supervisors count shipments and merchants negotiate prices nearby. Carts creak beneath heavy loads. Laborers move endlessly through organized chaos. Nobody standing there believes they're shaping history. They're simply working. But collectively, they are keeping millions alive. And that's the strange thing about civilizations. The moments that preserve them rarely look dramatic while they're happening. Nobody writes poems about efficient storage facilities. Statues aren't raised celebrating grain logistics. But without logistics, empires become stories. People tell about former empires. Rome also invested heavily in agriculture itself. Farms expanded across provinces. Irrigation improved productivity. Knowledge spread between regions. Better techniques increased yields. More food supported larger populations. Larger populations supported armies, economies, construction, and growth. Everything connected back into the same cycle. More stability creates more opportunity. More opportunity creates more growth. More growth requires more stability. It becomes a balancing act stretched across continents. But here's what makes Rome fascinating. They didn't simply react to problems after disaster arrived. Often they attempted to anticipate them before collapse happened. Not always successfully, of course. Rome eventually struggled with economic crises, political instability, corruption, and pressures from every direction imaginable. But for centuries they managed something extraordinary. They built systems strong enough to absorb damage without immediately breaking apart. Because eventually, storms arrive. Harvests fail. Leaders disappoint people. Enemies appear. Disasters happen. The question is never whether hardship comes. The question is whether the structure survives when it does. And as evening slowly settles across Roman streets and lamps begin glowing behind windows, you realize something important. Rome wasn't surviving because it avoided problems. Rome was surviving because thousands of invisible systems were quietly catching problems before they became catastrophes. And maybe that's the most powerful invention Rome ever created. Not buildings, not roads, not armies, but resilience itself. Hey guys, tonight we reached the final part of our journey through Rome, and by now something probably feels different because we began this story thinking about emperors, inventions, marble buildings, and grand victories. But somewhere along the way, the picture changed. Rome suddenly stopped looking like a collection of statues and battles and started looking more like a giant living machine. And like every machine, It depended on thousands of parts working together at the same time. Because here's the strange truth: history quietly hides beneath all the dramatic moments. Civilizations are not usually destroyed in one day, and they are rarely built in one day either. They grow slowly, stone by stone, road by road, decision by decision, person by person. Imagine standing on a hill outside Rome as evening settles over the empire. The sun sinks lower across the distant fields. Roads stretch toward the horizon in every direction, like veins carrying life across enormous distances. Merchants guide carts toward cities before darkness arrives. Soldiers return from long journeys covered in dust. Farmers gather tools after a day's work. Bakers prepare for tomorrow morning before most people are even thinking about sleep. In ports, ships arrive carrying grain and goods from distant lands. In bathhouses, conversations continue beneath warm rising steam. In homes, children listen while parents tell stories beside flickering lamps. Somewhere doctors clean wounds. Somewhere teachers copy text by hand. Somewhere engineers inspect structures that thousands of people trust without even thinking about them. Nobody in these moments believes they are building history. They are simply living ordinary lives. And that may be the most important thing to understand about Rome. History is usually built by ordinary people doing ordinary things repeatedly for a very long time. We remember emperors because they appear in books. We remember generals because victories sound dramatic. But empires survive because of builders, laborers, farmers, teachers, traders, doctors, and people whose names disappeared completely. The Roman world wasn't held together by one powerful man sitting on a throne. It was held together by millions of hands doing work that seemed small at the time. And for centuries, it worked. But eventually, even Rome began to change. Pressures grew heavier. Borders became harder to defend. Economies struggled. Politics fractured. Problems multiplied. And this is where many people imagine the story ending with flames and collapsing buildings and dramatic music playing somewhere in the background. But reality is quieter than that. Rome didn't simply vanish. Rome transformed. Pieces of it continued moving forward into the future. Roman law influenced governments. Roman engineering shaped construction. Roman roads guided travel. Roman language evolved into new languages. Roman ideas survived long after Roman emperors disappeared. Even today, echoes of Rome exist in places most people never notice. And that's beautiful in a strange way, because perhaps civilizations never truly disappear completely. Perhaps they leave fingerprints behind. Perhaps they become foundations beneath worlds they never lived long enough to see. So if you take one thing from tonight's journey, let it be this: Rome did not accidentally upgrade humanity because of one invention, or one emperor, or one moment of brilliance. Rome upgraded humanity because millions of people kept asking simple questions. How do we move faster? How do we build stronger? How do we heal better? How do we survive longer? And every answer became another stone placed into the road, leading toward the future. The candles burn lower now. The city grows quieter. Somewhere in the distance, footsteps fade into ancient streets beneath the night sky. And without realizing it, you leave Rome carrying a small piece of it with you, because in one way or another, all of us still do. The night has become quiet now. The streets that were filled with merchants, soldiers, workers, and voices slowly begin to empty beneath the fading glow of oil lamps. Rome, the city that once believed itself eternal, settles into the darkness almost peacefully. Somewhere beyond the walls, Wind moves through distant fields. Somewhere a guard shifts his spear and stares toward the horizon. Somewhere a tired traveler follows a stone road home without realizing that the road beneath his feet will outlive kingdoms, emperors, and perhaps even the memory of the men who built it. Because that is the strange thing about Rome. It was never only marble and crowns and dramatic speeches. Rome was systems. Rome was ideas. Rome was thousands of invisible decisions repeated every single day until they became the foundation of an empire. The aqueduct carrying water into the city, the doctor cleaning a wound, the engineer measuring stone, the teacher copying words into a codex, the merchant exchanging coins in a crowded market. All of them were quietly holding the world together. They did not wake up.